Good morning and welcome to Woodland Fitness. Today, before we get into the topic, we've got a few items to cover. Last week, I noticed that the audio was pretty not great. There were a lot of echoes, and so I actually purchased some acoustic pads to put around the room to kind of kill the echo. I also got a headset to keep track of the audio while I'm recording to provide better content for those of you that are listening, because even when I was listening to it in my car, I could tell right away the audio was bad and it drove me nuts. So I had to put off recording this episode. I actually recorded this whole thing already, and then I heard the last episode in my car and realized I need to fix a few things, do a retake. And I had to wait for the pads, the headset, and a few other things to get in. You're going to see some things change as I try to get the audio better. That way I can provide the best content for you. Now, that being said, after I went through all this work of finding the equipment to improve the audio, I went to a concert last night, and my voice is totally shot. So, unfortunately, my voice is a little bit more gravelly than it normally is. All right. So, with that out of the way, by the way, that concert was awesome. It was a lot of fun. And we're just going to jump straight into the topic from here. In the first take, it took me about 40 minutes to get through what I had to say. And since that first take, I've actually learned more about the topic. And this is just a disclaimer up front. This is going to be a long episode. I thought about splitting this up into a few different episodes so people could break it up. But the way that I'm approaching this topic, it works better if I approach it just all in one episode. So you'll have to forgive my scratchy voice a little bit while I talk through screaming at a concert all night. The topic that we're covering today is cold water immersion. So there's a few different aspects of cold water immersion, a few different aspects where cold water immersion is becoming more and more popular, especially in the fitness industry. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to go over the pros, the cons, and then some strategies to approach cold water immersion depending on your goals. Like I said, there are a few different approaches to cold water immersion, and there are several different benefits, and that's why this episode winds up being so long, is because there are different types of benefits that we're going to focus on. One of the biggest benefits that is focused on in the fitness industry right now is using cold water immersion for recovery. And what that means is that we're looking at soreness over time. You do a really heavy bout of exercise. You're looking for time to cool down. You're looking for, really what I'm looking for with some kind of recovery method is an improvement in my performance. Not necessarily overall, but improvement in performance after a heavy bout of exercise. And so one of the benefits of cold water immersion is that it does reduce soreness when it is used as a recovery method. Typically how it's used, at least in the research, is they recommend doing between 10 to 12 minutes after your bout of exercise. Sorry, trying to choke through my words really making me stumble on what I'm trying to say a little bit more. So I'm just going to slow it down, and we'll get through this as we get through this. But what the research has shown is that doing 10 to 12 minutes of cold water immersion after exercise greatly reduces soreness. And one of the major studies I looked at was a study that compared cold water immersion to, what was it called? It was whole body cryotherapy. I think that's how they called it in the research. And essentially what that is that you're in a your body is placed in a cold room, your head is above the box, and they place like gloves and socks on your extremities to keep you from getting any kind of damage from the cold. And they actually use liquid nitrogen to drop the temperature in the booth that you're in. And what the study looked at was it compared this whole body cryotherapy as an approach for recovery to cold water immersion as an approach for recovery. And what they saw was that cold water immersion greatly improved recovery over this whole body cryotherapy. And this is really important because that whole body cryotherapy, the temperature that they had to use with the liquid nitrogen dropped the room down to negative 133 degrees, which is so cold. Personally, I've only ever experienced negative 40, so I can only begin to imagine what negative 133 would feel like, especially for 10 to 12 minutes. Now, the temperature that was used for the cold water immersion was 59 degree water, which is just enough to get you to start shivering. You're definitely cold, but it's not unbearable. 10 to 12 minutes of 59 degree water, you can manage that, especially when you have winters like we have here in Idaho, where the temperature is dropping randomly and it's under, well, it doesn't get super cold here, but you know, you're sitting in the 20 degrees, 59 degrees is actually going to feel kind of warm. But that was what was used in the study. And so that is one major benefit that you can find. Now, another benefit of cold water immersion comes from the immune system approach. I'm just going to go ahead and give a disclaimer. I'm not a doctor. This is not a recommendation for you to overcome any kind of diseases. And overall, as a disclaimer, and this kind of goes into the cons, so I didn't want to jump into it right away, but there are definitely conditions where you should not participate in cold water immersion. If you're at risk for any kind of heart disease, just stay away from it. Decreases your blood pressure, and it could put you at risk for other things. So before you try using cold water immersion for recovery, or when we're looking at it from the immune system aspect, talk to your doctor. So the immune system side of things, I was actually first introduced to this during the time that I spent in Russia. So for those of you that don't know me, I lived in Russia for 2 years, and I was there as a missionary for my church. And there is a tradition that the Russians have on January 19th where they all go jump into the freezing ponds where I experienced negative 40 degree weather was in Russia. And January 19th, they call the day Krishenia. What that means is baptism. And the way that the tradition is usually celebrated is they'll cut a big old hole out of the ice on a lake or pond. People jump in. Most of the Russians that I spoke to, they were always the ones that told me that this boosted their immune system for the year, and what they saw is that they wouldn't get sick nearly as often throughout the year, or if they did get sick, it wasn't nearly as bad. And anytime they missed it, they'd see that they were more sick, or that they got sick more often. Now, the research does actually back this up. Usually, the way that it's been done in studies for your immune system is they do 10 to 12 minutes over an entire week. So what we're looking at is about 1.5 to 2 minutes of cold water immersion at about that 59 degree top end, like 63 degrees of water per day, until you get that 10 to 12 minutes over the entire week. And I think this is really interesting and a great approach, and I'm going to address it more when I get to the cons. Now, there's another part of the fitness industry where the cold water immersion is really taking storm, where it's getting really popular. And that side of the fitness industry is kind of the mental fortitude, strength aspect side. I think at using something like cold water immersion. And usually, when it's used in this aspect, I don't have specific strategies because this is not something I use to coach my clients. But if this is something you're interested in, usually what people do is they actually decrease the temperature over time. So you're going about this two different ways where you're trying to increase the amount of time that you can manage in the ice bath or cold water bath or cold water shower, however you decide to approach this. And you're either increasing the time that you're spending in this or you're decreasing the temperature over time. And that's one of those ways that you can help build mental fortitude. I don't have a lot to say about that. I think there are benefits to doing things like that. There's definitely a benefit to having strong mental fortitude. I do also think there are ways to approach it without using cold water immersion. But if that's what works for you, full send. Go jump in that tub. However, before you jump in that tub, let's talk about the cons. As I mentioned previously, if there are different conditions where doing cold water immersion could worsen your symptoms, or it could even cause heart problems because it does decrease your blood pressure. And you do run the risk of hypothermia when you start using those really low temperatures. Honestly, even with 59-degree water, if you're not accustomed to it, you could cause hypothermia. Essentially, the way that the cold water immersion works is through vasoconstriction, not construction. We're not building veins. There we go. Blanked on the word big time there. Actually, in the last take, I said vasodilation, which is also totally incorrect. That's when the veins start increasing in size and you see a greater amount of vascularity. So cold water immersion works through, I almost said it wrong just then, vasoconstriction, where it decreases the size of your veins and it slows down your blood pressure. This could be a really good way to kind of either ground yourself or bring down your stress levels quite a bit. But again, there are conditions that you might have that this might make your symptoms worse. Now, the other con that I'm looking at from my aspect is that the studies that have been done on doing cold water immersion for 10 to 12 minutes after bouts of exercise show a long-term decrease in hypertrophy or muscle growth and a long-term decrease in strength. Now, as someone who looks at strength and hypertrophy as my main outcomes, that's super important to me, and I'm not trying to use those types of recovery methods that might take away from my goals. I want my recovery method to work with my goals. Now, to refer back to the first study that I was talking about where they compared cold water immersion and whole body cryotherapy, there was a similar study done where they took relative soreness, and we're going to get into another study after this, where they took relative soreness and they looked at using cold water immersion as a recovery method for soreness versus using a 5 to 10 minute bike ride after your exercise or a 5 to 10 minute walk after your exercise. And what they saw was that you got the same reduction in soreness from the bicycle ride and from the walk that you did from cold water immersion. But from walking and bicycling, you don't get the same loss in hypertrophy or strength. And so if I were to look at recovery from strength outcomes and hypertrophy outcomes, I would lean more toward walking or cycling. Plus, there is that ease of access because if you're already working out in the gym, you already have access to a bicycle or a treadmill. And that's something they can very easily transition to after your workout. Now, more importantly, there was a study that was done that looked at cold water immersion, cycling, and control where they didn't do anything for recovery. And the things that they looked for was a reduction in soreness and a reduction in performance. So what that means is that your ability to perform at either the same level or the maximal level that you can after doing a difficult bout of training. And what they found was that both the cold water immersion and the cycling reduced the soreness. However, all three saw a reduction in performance in the next training training session. What that means is that cold water immersion, cycling, and doing nothing for recovery all had the same effect on your recovery for performance. So your ability to perform in that next training session. And if I were to put my money on something, I'm not going to put my body in freezing water, lose muscle, decrease your ability to build more muscle and decrease strength when it doesn't even help my performance in the long term. Now, the study also showed that a reduction in soreness does not equal a return to performance. So just because you're not sore anymore doesn't mean you're maximally performing. And I thought that was really interesting. Now, when it comes to the long-term studies that have been done on cold water immersion's effects on hypertrophy and strength, what they have done, the smallest amount of time they did was 1 time per week over 7 weeks. So that was 1 session of cold water immersion, 10 to 12 minutes per week over 7 weeks. And they saw a reduction in muscle protein synthesis, which is the signal that our body uses to build muscle, and muscle growth, and also strength. Now, when I'm looking at this from the con perspective, what I don't know is that if we took the approach that you use to boost your immune system, which is that 1.5 to 2 minutes, so a total of 12 minutes over the whole week, if that approach would have the same effect on hypertrophy and strength as doing 1 session of 10 to 12 minutes per week. I don't know that it would have the same effect, and up till now there haven't been any studies comparing the two. And I would love to see that comparison, because I think it would be important to be able to get that immune system benefit and then also have it not reduce your muscle gain or strength. Now, there are, of course, other ways to boost your immune system, so that's not a mandatory approach. And before I keep going, I think I've pretty much wrapped up what I wanted to say there. But I actually wanted to go back to some benefits that I've seen with cold water immersion, because over about 6 months, I experimented with cold water immersion. And the way I did it was cold water showers. So usually I take pretty hot showers, and then at the end of my shower, I drop the temperature and stand in that water for about 3 minutes. So the benefits that I saw from that were, I saw a boost in my mood, I saw feeling way more awake, and I didn't personally see this, but a lot of people report having better skin. I think a good strategy to be able to get that same effect without necessarily running the risk of reducing your muscle gains or strength would be actually taking cold water and just splashing it over your face first thing in the morning, because you're going to get that nervous system shock that kind of gives you that awakefulness and that boost in mood over the day. That might be a strategy. I really doubt that you would see a boost in your immune system from that kind of strategy. However, you would see some of the other benefits, and I would theorize that that strategy would not take away from your muscle gains or strength. Now, that being said, with all of that in context, what's more important are what your goals are. So for me, my goals are strength and muscle gain. So I'm not going to use cold water immersion as a recovery method because it would take away from my goals. However, if your goals are mental fortitude or learning better mindfulness techniques, these may be methods that help you. Or if you're trying to boost your immune system for the year, this may be a method that's worth trying. And I say go for it. There's definitely studies that back that cold water immersion boosts your immune system. It boosts your mood. It boosts wakefulness throughout the day. And these are great benefits. These are something that you want out of this style of recovery method. I feel like there was somewhere else I was going to go with this, but I can't really remember my train of thought. I read so many different studies about cold water immersion as I was prepping for this, because I've kind of already knocked it as a way for recovery for me, but I don't rule it out for other people because I do think it's important. Right, I wanted to make one final point about using it as a recovery method. After really tough bouts of exercise, if this is a recovery method that you enjoy doing and is easy for you to set up, I think it's a great way to reduce soreness. Just keep in mind that it won't increase your performance for the next training session, but neither will your other recovery methods. And I just remembered that the other recovery method that was looked at was massage therapy, and it also did not improve performance in the next training session. So these are great ways to reduce soreness. Just be aware that it won't increase your performance in your next training session. And there are ways that you can check and see where your performance level is at before a training session. And depending on whether or not you're doing flexible training, this may or may not be important to you. But that is cold water immersion in a nutshell. I can't see the time from here, but if I had to give a guess, in probably a 50-minute nutshell. But if you have any questions about cold water immersion or a way that you may be able to apply it to yourself, go ahead and leave a comment down here on my YouTube. Or if you listen to me on Spotify, reach out to me on Instagram at woodland_fitness, and you can send me any question in my DMs. I will answer you as quickly as I can. All right, so for this week, what are your recovery methods? Let me know. And I hopefully will have a more clear voice, and I'm going to find out if these acoustic pads actually really helped with that echo. All right, I will catch you next week. Bye.